this podcast, Harold Jarche talks about knowledge mastery and the future of work. So stay tuned. So welcome everyone to Jobs of Future podcast. Today we have with us Harold Jarche, and he is an expert behind the personal knowledge mastery model of Seek, Sense and Share, focused on helping individuals, teams, network continuously learn. The approach is in use in many organizations, including the NHS, Domino's Pizza, Bangor University. Harold helps organizations learn, work, and innovate in the network era. He has been described as a keen subversive of the last century's management and educational models. People have connected with Harold through his blog, jarche.com, and I'll post the link on the description as well, and professional services. For innovative ideas on leadership, social business, collaborative work, he also distills heady topics like complexity theory into practical advice. A graduate of the Royal Military College, Harold served over 20 years in the Canadian Forces in leadership and training roles. Harold has held senior position at Center of Learning Technologies and Ecom Inc. He is the co-author of the Working Smarter Fieldbook with his colleagues at the Internet Time Alliance. His preferred workplace is on his bicycle, where he gets his best ideas. That's pretty awesome. So Harold, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Vishal. It's great to be here.
Interesting. I think, so what I found really fascinating about your background, I think reading this brief synopsis sums most of them up, all the keywords pushed together that is actually impacting the future of work. So why don't you walk us through your journey? Like what brought you to this field?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I spent over 20 years in the military. So I joined the Army when I was very young. I was 18 years old. I went to military college. I started as an infantry officer. And then, as my wife says, I bore easily. So I spent about 10 years in the infantry. I transferred into the medical corps. I became a hospital administrator. And later, in my last 5 years in the military, I transferred and I became a training specialist, actually working for the Air Force. And that was my major pivot, I would say that I made, is that, so this would have been in the early 1990s. I had transferred into the training branch, and I was responsible for developing helicopter training. And so training for the mechanics, for the pilots, for flight engineers. And part of my job was incorporating the flight simulator into how do we use it. And at that time, computer-based training was coming along. So I actually went back to school. I started working on my master's in education because here and now I'm working in the learning and training field. And I got hit sort of like by a bolt of lightning when I saw my first web page. So I saw this web page, and I took my first computer course in programming in 1978 in Fortran. And I failed the course, but the prof passed me with a promise that I would never take another computer course again, which I haven't. And so I stayed away from computers. I had no interest in information technology or anything like that. But when I saw this this web page, suddenly computers made sense to me. They were about connecting people, and I just went, "Wow, this is incredible!" And I went back to school, did a master's in education, looked at how people learn in the information technology workplace, how the machines were influencing them. I read all the works of Marshall McLuhan. He's the famous Canadian who coined the term "the medium is the message," the global village, and I still use McLuhan's work in my own work now, 20 years later. I decided to leave the military because the web was heating up, and where I live here in New Brunswick, there was a big marketing campaign going on for the information highway. And I wound up at this place called the Center for Learning Technologies, which is a pretty cool place. It was co-located with the university, and we were a small team, but we did really kind of bleeding edge stuff, because we did stuff that the private sector didn't want to do. So we're doing knowledge management, performance, electronic performance support systems. We're a little bit around e-learning, but not too much around on the courses, and a lot around online communities. And this is using early technologies like Lotus Notes. This was before the kinds of things that we see now, like Slack and Yammer and tools like that. So I really got deep into the whole notion of virtual work, virtual communication, and what they called computer assisted collaborative work, those kinds of things. I worked there for 3 years, but the university decided to shut us down because we weren't turning a huge profit. They thought that we were going to be making the millions of dollars, and after existing only for 4 years. So anyway, they shut it down. I wound up working for an e-learning company that was making an LMS. I was in charge of professional services for that, and spent a couple of years with them. We came under new ownership, and the first thing they did was fire me. And it's okay. They went bankrupt a few months later. So I'm still here 15 years later. So, aha. And so 15 years, I am as a freelancer. And, most of it, actually, if you're interested in it, is that I started my blog 14 and a half years ago. And so there's 14 plus years of my thoughts and things about, kind of where I've been and where I've gone on that. But, now, and as I tell people, is that my blog gave me everything. So when I got fired from this company, I had a very small network here in Atlantic Canada, which, as you know, is kind of the middle of nowhere. You probably saw more moose than people when you visited here. And, there are no major businesses here or anything like that. And now, if you take a look at, where I'm working as I got back from Portugal last month, where I was speaking at a tech recruiting conference. I'd spoken for that company before this year in Berlin. I'm off to Helsinki in October, doing some speaking in Oslo as well. And really, the main reason that people find out about me or have learned about me, or I've done this, I'm able to connect, is through the blog. So if the blog had not existed, I would not have been able to do this. I mean, again, I'm really in a very different. There's nobody in my community who knows what I'm doing. And, for me, a close client would be going down to Boston and seeing you. And that's 600 miles, about 1,000 kilometers away.
Yeah.
So, so again, my blog gave me everything. And then I've done a few other things too.
Beautiful. And where do you spend your time nowadays? Like, what do you do now?
So right now is that, to mention is that I'm a keynote speaker talking about future of work around competencies in a networked world. So I'm very interested. And what I say is that work is learning, and learning is the work. And that, I think, is the big shift: is that you don't go to school and then stop learning and then do your work. Is that more and more is that just to stay current is that we have to integrate learning into our workflow. And that doesn't mean, taking an e-learning course once a week or something like that. It's, how do I learn socially? How do I connect with other people? How am I going to keep pushing at the edge of my professional ability? And the people who do that really well are programmers, people who code, right? Because you can't go to school to learn the latest coding because they haven't figured that stuff out yet, right? So you're connecting through different professional organizations, communities of practice. You're putting your code out there so other people can look at it. And I think more and more professions are going to move that way. We're going to have to learn as we work. So I speak on that. I run workshops, both face-to-face workshops and online workshops, around a framework that I've developed. You mentioned it in the intro on personal knowledge mastery. We can go into depth a little bit about that later if you want to. And then I also do my writing. I mentioned the old book, the Working Smarter Field book that we wrote with my Internet Time Alliance colleagues. And I also have my own books that are now called the Perpetual Beta series. And I have 5 volumes of that out, and it's one of those. It's the series that will never end. it's in perpetual beta, so I pull out. So I try to put out a volume once a year, And they're around 50 to 75 pages, looking at changing nature of leadership, changing nature of workplace learning, and some of the big issues. One that I sort of started looking at just in the last year was gender balance, and was about the retrieval that we're seeing in the connected world of more what have traditionally been seen as feminine leadership attributes. And that the more traditional male attributes seem to have less value in this type of in a networked world, where really you're influencing people more through your reputation than your positional power. And it seems that women have been much better at influencing that way than men have. So again, what we saw traditionally as feminine attributes now are ones that are required pretty well everywhere.
We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI-powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast. Interesting. Fascinating story, by the way. And I think it's inspiring to see what all you have accomplished through blogs. And I think it's massive. I think blogging is the word that I think is massively underappreciated, because it's actually making a lot of interesting conversation happen, and that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So I do appreciate that. So let's talk about your journey when it comes to how the workplace has evolved. Like from you have a good vantage point on, you have been consulting, you have been watching, you were acting as a watchdog on what's happening in the industry. You are actually part of conversation when it comes to conferences talking about future of work. So what is your vantage point on how the work has evolved over the last couple of decades, if you can share, and last couple of years, you can the way it's expanding. So what's your thought on that?
Well, it's the famous William Gibson quote where he says, "The future is already here. It's just very unevenly dispersed." Right? And so I think that the big changes we really haven't seen yet. So I'm very interested in companies that sort of made this leap. And it seems that it's the same ones that keep getting dragged out all the time. People talk about Google or W.L. Gore Associates and things like that. But there are some interesting ones now, like Buurtzorg, which is a Buurtzorg. It's a Dutch nursing care company, and they have really pushed out responsibility and decision making to these groups of about 10 nurses. They work in these. I think 12 is the largest team size, and they can make all their decisions pretty well themselves, including budget and training. And the headquarters is very, very small. I think it's 50 people for a 7,000 or 8,000 person organization. There are interesting signs about where the change is, but it's really still small and sparse. And I think that generally what we're seeing happen is that we're automating any work that can be automated. There's Ben Hammersley, who was an advisor to the UK Prime Minister several years ago, said that if any process that can be put into a flowchart is going to get automated, by software, by machines, or something like that. So if you can describe your job, then it's probably going to go away. So I can't describe my job, so I guess it'll never go away. And so automation is the big driving force, and we see that because the way that our bookkeeping principles work is that if I buy a piece of machinery, right, I can depreciate the value. If I hire a person, that's a cost, and it stays a cost every year. Right. So just from the way that we account for things is that we account for capital differently than we account for humans. Even though we may call it human capital, we don't treat it that way. So any of that sort of simple or even complicated work is getting automated. And so if you look at, what's left for people is the stuff that machines can't do. And what can't machines do very well? Machines are not very creative. Machines are not very empathetic. Machines don't have the same pattern recognition that we have, right? Machines aren't social, right? Which is what we are. So those kinds of skills are the things. So I think that where the future is going is people working with machines. I mean, look at this. I mean, the technology that we're using right here. I remember when this stuff cost $100,000. right? And I'm sure that you're not paying $100,000 to use this platform. So it's that machine augmented world, right? In most areas, there are some areas that will never be machine augmented. I don't think they're ever going to design a machine that does that'll replace hairdressers, right? Because that's a high touch, very unique type of thing, and it would cost too much to again, for several years. Maybe in the far future it will be. But I think that for a lot of people, particularly traditional white collar people, is that you're going to be working with machines, with algorithms, but the value that you're going to be providing is in working with humans, working socially, working in social networks, communities of practice, in working in flash teams. And that's the other thing I think that we're seeing, is that the period of time that a team is together or a group is together is going to be less and less. And a lot of people I know, when they work, is that they're on 4 or 5 different teams. Right. And so you're working on that. So the work is people getting together, having to be really quickly get up to speed, work well together, then disperse and work in another group, and disperse and work in another group. So your long-term connections are actually your social network. Right? Your short-term connections, in a lot of cases, are the people that you work with, because we're seeing the half-life of companies decreasing over time, and the half-life of teams and groups and departments, as well, as people try to keep up to these changes. And change is going to happen faster, because more and more of the value that we're creating is intangible. And those intangible assets can change, in a heartbeat.
Interesting. I definitely want your perspective on one perspective that I have, coming from the data science end. So how we are seeing so-called the landscape of work shifting is, so it's all about intelligence, right? So now there's a machine intelligence, there's a human intelligence, and many times we get confused between, hey, which is machine and which is human, and even our definition of intelligence is evolving as machines are evolving, and machine can do certain things. So we can say, okay, machine, you can do certain things very well, humans, you can do certain things, and whatnot. Now if you're at a business level, and you're looking at your balance sheet, so and then we see a lot from our interaction with business folks, that many times the numbers confuse people. So they say, okay, too much machine is good, too less humans. As you rightly said, every human is a cost center to some degree. We have our own nuances, we have to sleep, we have to eat, all that fun stuff that happens with us, and on the other side there's a machine that's happening. Now it's very easy to automate or put your entire competitive edge on automation, saying, okay, this is where the machine is going, numbers looks amazing, let's keep on progressing. But if you look at business culture and why the business exists for hundreds of years, it's not because the processes that can automate quickly, but because of the core competency or the art in their business. Now if you're on the HR end of this conversation, you are the executioner of this strategy of, hey, more people, less people, whatever, right? So what is your thought around how technology is disrupting this work landscape, and what's the role of this HR as we're progressing in this hyper technologically connected world? We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast.
Well, I think that the real function of HR is only one, and that's to keep the CEO out of jail. So it's compliance oriented. And I think that history has shown that. And I don't think that HR per se is really going to have a long lifespan. I think that it really is as we automate things that can be automated, right, is that, well, we don't need to have, the rules can go into the machines. Where there's no rules, then that suddenly is that we now have a barely repeatable process. We have a unique process. We have something creative. And in those kinds of cases, is that it's kind of like when you call a company up, right? It's like, you want to feel that your problem in your case is special. It's not okay, we have three different types of problems that we're solving. You say, but I don't fit into one of your problems. I want to be treated. So if you have a standard process to address people, then they don't feel special anymore. And really, what you do is you erode trust, right? And I think that's so. As soon as you start adding those standardized processes, is that what you're saying is that we don't trust you? We have a process for this, right? No, you say no. I mean, it's like families. Families don't have, most, at least partially functioning families don't have a series of rules and rule books and stuff like that. They have some general principles, right? But then they deal with things on a one-to-one basis, and as the children grow up, and things change, and it's flexible. And I think that's what you need in terms of work, is that you need to be focus the human on the human side, but that means that you're also, but that's fuzzy, that's soft, that's non-codified. But there's a really good stuff about automation. First of all, is that machines are doing work that people had to do before that was boring. I mean, you don't have to work on a shovel all day long or anything like that. You don't have to work in the depths of the mines anymore, because you've got machines doing it. You've got operators running them from the surface, and the machines are going down below. So, that's all really good stuff. But I also think that as we continue to automate that, is that the thing, but human creativity is unlimited. Right. So it's not like we're going to run out of sorry, we've used up our creative capital. We can't do any more than that. So I think that where we want to be focused on is helping everybody be creative, and you can't do that in standardized curriculum. You can't do that with a standardized job. I think that the job itself is going to go the way of the dinosaur too, because when you think about jobs, how many people had jobs 200 years ago? Not many, right? The military, the church, a few other organizations, but for the most part, people had vocations, they had skills, and they did whatever they could do in different areas. Then we created the standardized job, which I think is an anomaly. And now I think we're moving away from the standardized job into individuals with relationships.
Interesting. And I think one thing that was fascinating in your response was, I think, the need for HR going forward, right? So to give you some background, so we have a solution called Tao.ai, and this is primarily to help people find jobs, right? It's as simple as that. It's an AI, right? So typically, when we started this project, we thought, okay, AI actually can do a good job in sort of helping, because it's numbers, it's all data, it's all fun stuff, right? And then we start realizing that AI, the diversity problem is very real even with AI, right? AI is beautiful at sort of, okay, I know the trends, so the next one should follow the trend. And then instantly we realize that we're recommending people which are very, very obvious solutions. And the very aspect of, and then you pointed beautifully, that creativity, right? That human creativity. If I give you like 70 people from the same background, same culture, same everything, because previous 69 were hired that ways, then the creativity bank is decreasing, because diversity play an important role in that, right? So then we started realizing, okay, now we see the HR's problem, right? So because now it's very easy to say, hey, HR could be automated or outsourced, but on the other side, some of the nuances that we don't appreciate today, like diversity and sort of on all these loopholes, we need some creative folks on HR side as well to figure out, hey, what interesting blend we should bring in the workforce. So what's your thought on that?
No, I agree. I think that using AI to do things that are repeatable is wonderful. And I think that if we're doing unique work or barely repeatable process, so barely repeatable processes, could be a patient coming in and trying to figure out if somebody's sick or whatever. There's a whole bunch of things that you have to do, and you can't do the same thing each time, because of course you've got so many different variables. But within that barely repeatable process, there are probably sub processes in there. It's kind of like, okay, what if you have to get the crash cart? There's a way to get the crash cart, and there's rules and things that can be inside that. So I think that sort of, if you're looking at from how we look at work, is that we give people the flexibility to deal with complex problems, and there are companies and processes that do that, where they'll do something like, well, we have a problem. A customer has called and we can't deal with this problem. What do? They swarm the problem. So they push a button. Anybody who's available, get in on this call and listen, and let's see what we can do to address this. When that problem is solved, right, then they have ways in which they take a look. Okay, what did we do? How do we do that? Can we do this again? Did we learn anything from this? And we can get that in there. And maybe there's a part of that solution then that becomes a repeatable process. Okay, well, we've got a thing for that. And I think that a lot of people want to have some repeatable process. Like, I don't want to have to explain my relationship with the bank when I go to an ATM to withdraw money. I just want to withdraw the money and have it over and done with, right? It's kind of like if you want to buy something from Amazon, they make it as simple as possible, right? One click, bang, it's done. And I think that we want to have that so that we can then free up our time for the creative stuff. It's like when we think about work, is that, I mean, if you can create a job description, really what you're talking about is the repeatable stuff. And most of that stuff is then going to be done by AI, machines, or whatever. So we're actually looking at it the wrong way. What we want to do is we want to have a relationship with an individual who's able to grow and learn, become part of the company, add to the company. My one of my business partners, Jay Cross, who died about 3 years ago, he had a great explanation. He says, you take a look at any producing job and the traditional worker, and they're at the job. And what do? They go produce. Basically, you're doing stuff, right? He said, now you take a look at a creative knowledge worker, and what do they do all day long? Nothing. Brilliant flash of insight. Nothing. Right? So work looks completely different. So I mean, if I came up with the idea of the iPhone, right? But it's kind of like, well, Harold, you've only got one idea. Yeah, but look at the value of that idea. Whereas we're measuring, so, well, you did nothing for the other 8 years or 10 years that you were with Apple. Well, was it, we measure, we don't measure creativity because we don't know how to do it. And I think that we can get the inspiration. We should take a look at how artists learn and how they work and what they do. Right. So a lot of times they go for walks or they go out and, they move locations and things like that because to get inspiration. And they realize what they're also honing their skills and they're getting better at what they're doing. It's like me as a blogger, right? I write regularly because it makes me a better writer. So again, it's finding that balance, but we have to look at work and the results very differently. I mean, we still pay a lot of people by the hour.
Interesting. Right? No, I think that's fascinating. And what I noted, what I was thinking when you were saying that, you have seen it really well. You have been blogging, you have been consulting, you have been talking businesses, and you have somehow figured out your niche, right? But if you look on a typical job, right, I do 17 things. Out of that, maybe 2 are I do really well, and rest 15 are pretty lousy, and then still I paid for whatever, right? And I think I was talking to one of the Fortune 100's chief HR officer, and he put it best. He said, Vishal, future would not demand more chefs. Future would demand soupreneurs and sandwichpreneurs, right? So you need very, very specific folks who can do specific things really well, and they'll be valued a lot more on sort of that perspective. What is your take on the future of work? Like, how would the workers see where the future is heading?
Well, if you think that, you don't have to agree with me on this one because it is happening, is that the half-life of companies is decreasing. The S&P has been mapping this for years, right? And so we know that company life, organizational life is getting shorter. I think that another inference or observation that I've made is that teams, groups, and companies are together for shorter periods of time. Right? That the long-term groups don't seem to be a thing much anymore. People come, people go. The group changes. It gets reorganized. The company gets bought or sold or whatever it is. So that if you look at that, is that, well, what kind of people do we need? We don't need specialists. We need actually what friends of mine they wrote a book. So it was. Richard Martin and Kenneth Nicholson wrote a book called The Neo Generalist. And it's interesting because a lot of people have identified with that notion of Neo Generalist. And a Neo Generalist is is not a generalist. It's someone who actually has deep specialties in one or usually in several areas, and also has a broad understanding in a wide variety of areas. It's almost like the new Renaissance man. That's what the Neo Generalist is. And I think I think more and more people, the people you want in the company are people who are Neo Generalists. Yes, okay, somebody who can code, but also someone who has strong social skills, right? Which, of course, that's what we see is that, I want somebody who can write in what the latest coding language is, but they also have to be able to sell this idea to the client. And it's kind of like, well, I'm a coder. I'm going to stay in the basement. I'm not going to talk to anybody. So I think that we need people with deep skills and with broad skills. And I think that the big ones are going to be what are traditionally seen as the soft skills. So things like being able to communicate, being able to understand people, empathize with them. And we're seeing that. That's what LinkedIn did a survey on that recently. What skills are people looking for? There are a lot of these, what they call soft skills. And those soft skills are the hard skills to develop. And in a lot of cases, we do very little to actually help develop those types of skills, either in education programs or at work.
Interesting. And if I'm in HR and I'm trying to sort of conceptualize this session, how would I look at how would I ensure that my folks are learned and developed for this new age of enterprise formations? Like, what would you suggest? We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI-powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast.
I usually work on two things with companies. One is the individual skills. So it's helping people. That's where the personal knowledge mastery framework came about. I developed it for myself. And it was, how do I take control of my learning? How do I connect with others? How do I engage in communities and in networks and use social media particularly to help me do that? Because I'm removed from, you're never going to have enough face-to-face contacts to really meet all your needs. But there are, that's why you and I are talking, right? We're connecting. We're connecting at a distance. So the individuals having the skills. The second one is in most cases, it's removing barriers. It's having the system so that people can seek, sense, and share. So that simple things like having an enterprise social network. So that anybody can sort of connect with anybody else. That removing that barrier of having to ask permission to be able to talk to somebody else. And there's other barriers like that. Performance management systems that are measuring the wrong thing. W. Edwards Deming, 40 years ago said performance management is one of the 7 deadly sins of performance measurement. The annual performance review was one of the deadly sins because we're actually measuring the wrong thing. Why are we measuring individuals when we should be looking at group and company performance? Because we are all dependent upon the other people that we're working with, right? It's not one person. And we have that false sense about, let's change the CEO and that will change the whole system. When really we should just change the system so anybody can do a good job as CEO.
That's a good point. So let's talk briefly about your mastery model. I think I was reading about personal knowledge mastery model. Like, if you can walk us through what exactly is that?
Okay, so it started out of necessity. So I started blogging, and so here I am in Sackville, New Brunswick, middle of nowhere, no work, young family. And I felt, okay, I've got to stay current. I have to stay current in my field. I have to see what's going on. And I didn't have the money to go fly to Boston and go in some big tech conference or something like that. So I thought, well, I've got the web. It's free. And how do I connect with other people who are going to help me learn? And so the PKM, which comes from personal knowledge management, I didn't invent this. I changed it to mastery several years ago because I really think it's more of a discipline than a management system. And really, what it is, so people like Lilia Efimova, she did her doctoral thesis looking at how people use blogs to share knowledge. And so that was the whole thing about, okay, well, if I want to connect to people outside, how do I do that? Well, no one's going to talk to you if you don't put yourself out there first. So the blogging was the first tool that I really started using. And then I started looking at other tools. And over the years, I wrote about it. And so, and for me, it was just a thing like on the side, like a side desk. It wasn't even a project. It was more like me trying to figure out how the heck I'm going to be a viable consultant, right? And luckily, I had regional work. I was mostly working in Canada at the time. And 5-6 years into me writing about this, I was contacted by Domino's Pizza. And the fellow in charge of leadership training said, I like your PKM model. He said, can we incorporate this into our leadership training program? I said, that sounds cool. So I went to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and met with them, and we took a look at it and worked with their IT people and created a framework for their leadership training for their franchise owners. And then it sort of built up over time. Now there's like a dozen universities that use it. Only one of them paid me for it. The rest just sort of take what I publish for free. So I'm not making any money off of that. But then I have worked with several companies who've tried to implement it into their own framework. The most recent one was with Carlsberg in their leadership training. And that's really where PKM fits in well, is with leadership, because I don't think in this day and age you can be a leader if you're not a learner.
Interesting.
And we wrote an article in Harvard Business a couple of years ago saying, the best leaders are constant learners. So how do you do that? And really what PKM is a framework to give you some common terms, some common concepts, and then you develop your own. There's no methodology. It's not a lockstep method. Everybody practices it in different ways. And the seek, sense, share is just sort of like the outer layer of it. So you have to seek out diverse people, diverse opinions, diverse places for information. You have to find some way of making sense of it. So blogging is a big part of my sense-making process, but for other people, it's not blogging; it's something else. And then the notion of making things available so that you can share them. And that's where the blog is good, because we can talk about something. You can say, hey, can you recommend a good book? I can say, yeah. Oh, by the way, I wrote a review on it. Let me just give you the link to the review. I don't know when someone is going to be interested in that book, but because I've got it ready to share, that makes it much easier. And it also reduces my cognitive load. I don't have to find it. I can search it easily and things like that. So that's where, and I'm finding in the last few years is that the people who take my workshops, they come back and they say, yeah, this is the course. PKM is the core skill set in a knowledge creative economy. Of course it is, because you have to find some way to learn. I'm not saying that my framework is the only one, but it is a framework that, again, has been now over 10 years in practice and is constantly being modified.
Interesting. And if you can walk briefly about that, what the frame. So I think I read seek, sense, and share. So what's that? If you can give me a sort of a quick glimpse of what the framework is.
Yeah, so seek, sense, share is and that came through some client work where I'd had a 8-step model before, and then I'd worked on the 3, and there's alliteration. People remember it, right? And that's the big thing: seek, sense, share. So that then helps you take a look and say, okay, well, like some of the exercises that I do with people is like, how do you examine your network? Where do you get information from? If you have to make a decision, who do you go to? Let's take a look at who they are. If you have to do this type of thing, or you have to find out about this area, where do you go to? And you take a look at it, and then you can take a look at, am I seeking from a diverse source? And diversity is in the eye of the beholder. Diversity depends upon, it could be, what I really need is gender diversity, or actually what I need is a diversity of expertise, or perhaps a diversity of opinions, diversity of experience, diversity in age, culture, company, industry, that kind of thing. So just being cognizant of the fact that, I am influenced by where I get my information from and who I talk to. And we know that. We know that our social networks determine whether or not, are a very strong determinant in whether or not we are obese. Is that you take a look at obesity and you take a look at people's social networks, you can see that there's direct impact. Christakis and Fowler did work on that, published. I think they actually were out of Boston, on social networks and the influence of social networks on our lives. So if we are who we connect with, then we should be looking at who are we connecting with. They say if you really want to change, you want to do something better, is hang out with people who exhibit the traits that you want to have. If you want to be smart, hang out with smart people. And so again, so that's part of the seeking is seeking diversity in all things, and in some cases limiting it too, and saying, yeah, I don't need diversity in this. I don't really care. Right? We only have so much time. The sense making, that's the tough one. Is that what do I do to make sense of all the things that happen in my life? On a day-to-day, a week-to-week basis, something like that. So some people, it's like one example is this woman who she drives home every day. So she's a commuter, and she talks to herself on the way back about what she learned and what she did. That's a cool thing.
Cool thing.
Your podcasting actually is one thing that you're doing here. What are you doing in terms of diversity? I presume you're doing this for your own learning as well. Right? So the podcasting is a sense making thing. There's probably more sense making in producing a podcast than there is in listening to one. The only reason that people are going to share with me is not the only reason, but a prime reason is because I've shared with them. So if I provide valuable input into my Twitter stream, people follow me. What that means is that if I post a question, I have a greater chance of getting an answer than somebody who's not adding value and has like 20 followers, right? So, but you only get into thousands of followers by giving, or you can buy the bots and stuff. But we'll pass on that. I hear there's some Russian companies that have them available. So that's pretty well it. It's a constant refinement. You never get to perfection, but just saying, okay, well, what am I doing to make my network smarter? What am I giving? And again, because most of my work comes through my blog. I gave for free through the blog, and as a result, I get paid work. But it's not a direct relationship. And that, I think, is a real tough thing for people. Like, when will I be ready? When do I get certified? You won't be ever. It's a non-direct, non-linear relationship, and I think that's which makes it a tough sell.
No, I think I couldn't agree more. So, being a blogger, so I think what I recall from the early blogging days, I was using it to vent out my sort of technology rant. I just need a place to vent it out, and I never cared to sort of get anything back. And I think I remember that 6-7 months down when I started blogging, I got a call from one of the world's largest CPG companies saying, "Hey, can you fly to one of our board meetings because we need to have a conversation around one of the data initiatives?" I said, "Really? Do you know who you're talking to?" He said, "Yeah, your name was recommended to us by someone, blah blah blah." And at that point, I think in early days, you don't even know who is reading your blog. You just yap it out and just forget about it, and then the next one goes after probably a week. And then I realized that, okay, we start getting these gigs and whatever, right? So after the fact, it's easy. But when I go to convince someone that, hey, instead of doing an MBA, you just start yapping out on the internet and see what people stick to, and then find your voice and find their voice. That would be faster way to learn. But as you rightly said, it's a very hard sell to get people to, because it's like a slingshot approach that you do something now and hopefully something will come back.
Yeah, the problem is that it's long term is the problem, is that the value is long term. So a blog with 10 posts really doesn't have much value. My blog, which has, what am I at, 3,000 or something like that, has a lot of value for me and for other people, because there's lots of stuff there on lots of different subjects. So you don't see the value of it at the beginning, and so that of course is the problem, right? Is that telling people, yes, this will be valuable to you sometime, but when, right? So I don't know, and it's non-linear. So it's not like, okay, I write 10 blog posts and I got one client, right? It may be one blog post I wrote 5 years ago. Somebody reads it and they go, come and talk to our board about this kind of stuff because we're very interested in it. So that again, that makes it difficult. The other thing with PKM, and there really are very few programs that are sort of directly compete with my PKM program, because it's tough. It takes work. It takes time. I run a 60-day online workshop, and quite often people take it a second time, because it's like, yes, I do it over 60 days because you need time in between. We have 18 activities, and I can do an introduction in a one-day workshop, but you're not going to get mastery in a day. It takes time. It takes work. It takes reflection. And in our sort of busy day-to-day work cycles, people don't want to do that.
Interesting. Wow. And so, if I'm a working professional navigating through this, how would I ensure myself to be sort of employable in this new age of work as I'm heading to it? Like, what would your suggestions be to someone to ensure that I'm employable or I'm employed?
I think that for long-term employability, it is focusing on what are seen as the soft skills, so that things that we know are not going to go out. So writing well, speaking well, getting along with others, empathy, sociability, curiosity is another one. Is always trying the ability to learn new stuff. So always trying something new. Like a lot of times I'll get a new piece of software, something like that, and then learn how to use it and discard it after 6 months or something. But the process of learning it is one of those learning skills, right? Is that okay? I can figure these things out fairly quickly. I think that, again, if you think about it from a Neo Generalist perspective, is being a broad Neo Generalist, but then also having some deeper skills. So, right now, and I wouldn't look at this as the long term, is that being able to code is a skill people are looking for. So I was at this recruiting fair in Portugal and previously in Berlin, and it was interesting because I remember recruiting fairs from way back when. Is that that supply exceeded demand, and now demand exceeds supply, and so that anybody who wanted a job could get one. And it was, well, what do we want? Okay, AI, machine learning, blockchain. Certain types of programming languages. That's what people were looking for. So if you have any expertise in that field, is that go for it. And I was talking to people who were recruiting, and it was kind of like they're saying, yeah, I can get junior programmers and I can get sort of mid-level, but what I can't get are senior people. Is that that there's a real shortage of senior people. And I think that if you were, again, going down the programming route, is that having that depth of experience, but then also working on your social skills, I think would make, even by doing things like by blogging, right? So you get known that way, and then your social network becomes your social safety network.
Interesting. Yeah, that's well said. So, what would be the tenet of a future-proof organization? So, what would you think are some of the qualities that some organizations could possess to ensure that their half-life is not as predictable as many of their competitors? Like, what would you suggest?
What would I suggest? Because you're a little broken up on this end.
So
what would I suggest to organizations that they should do to keep themselves?
Yes. So what are some of the tenets or some of the qualities that an organization should have to ensure that they are future proof from disruption, or at least stay relevant in disruptive times?
Well, one of the things that I've recommended is to, I talk about automation, is to preempt automation, is to take a look at any person's work and find out what is repeatable, how much of the work that they're doing is repeatable, and automate it before your competitors automate that. And so if anybody's job is 50% or more repeatable processes, is get rid of those, automate those processes, and then get that person working on higher end, more complex, more creative, more unique type of work. So really, that's my whole notion of perpetual beta, is that whatever work you're doing is going to change. This is only a beta instance before you get into the next beta instance. So thinking about work as not something that is fixed, but something that is constantly moving, and that whole notion of constant development. If we look at how people learn for work, is that about 10% they learn through formal courses and training and education, about 20% through exposure to new ideas, new people, new types of work and things like that, and 70% from the experience of the day-to-day work that they're doing. So if we can help make workplaces places where people have experience, they have time to reflect on their experience, which almost never happens, right? A lot of times you get a project that works, and when it's over, everybody goes away. There's a report perhaps that's written, but no one actually spends time talking about, okay, what happened, during the process. There's no time for reflection. So putting in time for reflection, if you think about it from a learning perspective, if you think of learning as the work, which really it is, then you've got to make time, space, and there are people who can help facilitate that. So if you have an enterprise social network, you have community managers, right? You have people who are actually seeing the work that you're doing, that you're talking about in Slack, putting those things together, and perhaps creating an artifact around, here are some current new practices that people are doing. Right? I don't have time to write all this stuff up, but somebody else in the company can put this together and then disseminate it to everybody else.
Interesting. And then, what about what's your perspective on the reskilling? So I think one of our client, so he put it best. He said, Vishal, I was looking for two AI machine vision guys, and I have 15,000 IT professionals, and I can't get one of those guys, right? And then I know soon they will be obsolete, and we would have really thankfully used a couple of our folks, but they are not trained at the right time, and I have to go out looking for those folks. And many of these organizations that we talk to, almost everyone has the same problem. They are overblown on the obsolete technologies, and they're not retooling or retraining fast enough. And I was talking to one of the Fortune 100, one of their chief of staff guy, and he was telling me that, Vishal, if we all have the tendency to be obsolete, stats goes out of the window. No one cares about stats anymore. Like it's a massive problem that we all are suffering. So what is your perspective on how businesses could sort of stay themselves current when it comes to skills? Like what would you suggest?
Yeah, I think that companies too often don't have the long view. And if you actually take a look at it, you can look at it more from how families grow. It's like, if you have a dysfunctioning 2-year-old, you don't throw them outside. You work and develop them into a better functioning 3-year-old and 4-year-old and things like that. And companies have had it too easy in terms of, we need to hire 10 programmers. Well, we're just going to go out and find 10 programmers because there's, again, the supply and demand thing. Whereas if you look at people as an asset, which they don't, then you look at the investment in them is that, well, how do we invest in these people becoming better? So it's the Nordic countries do this quite well because they have a good marriage between business and the government sector, so that when people lose their job, like when Nokia lost thousands and thousands of people, is that the average worker wasn't concerned because they had a couple of years of unemployment insurance. But on top of that is that in a lot of these countries, you can't draw unemployment insurance for more than a short period of time unless you take some more training and you upskill as you do that. So that's, again, that's between the businesses and the government. And so that, you have to take a look at that as again, people are not cogs that you buy. You really, it should be seen as an investment. And if that person has the right attributes, the right attitude and things like that, and if they don't have the skills, well, wouldn't it be better to retrain that person in those skills than than hire somebody who's got the skills but doesn't have the company culture? Right? And again, I think then that's a problem with HRs, because HR, I think, too often sees, okay, we have a job and we have to fill a job. No, you have a person and you have to have a relationship with them. And that's what it is. And that relationship may change over time. And if you think about that, is that, even in the long term, is that people may go to another company, but if you have that long-term relationship with them, now the person in the other company becomes a link in the social network of that company, and that maybe they become a client later. Maybe they come back and do a job. Maybe, again, thinking about the different types of relationships that people can have, and not thinking about, so go away from the mechanistic view of people filling a job to the sort of the biological view of, this is a relationship amongst complex human beings. And that kind of relationship is going to have multiple valences, not just, I'm doing some work and you're paying me.
Interesting. And I think very fair point. And I think so we were sort of investigating something around the same concept, and we did along this idea of retooling. And then one of the sort of our way to measure that was any candidate talking to a company, if they get a perspective of, hey, how would company ensure that I'm at the top of my game? I'm always at the current, and I'm actually using world's best technologies and methodologies. And we did our own sort of market research through our network, and we asked folks, hey, how many of you actually, when you go to an interview, ask for, hey, how would you ensure that I will be employable beyond you, right? So how would you invest in me as I'm investing in you, and sort of we both have, because I think one of the nightmare scenario is an obsolete employee, right? And working and not getting noticed. So how would company ensure? And to not to our surprise, actually we expected that. So we realized about 97% of folks that we survey said they don't go there. They don't talk about the future beyond company. They just talk about, hey, what challenges you have, what challenges I need, and is the marriage going to happen? And almost 80% of those said, hey, we want to ask that question. Like, now I know I should, because that's the most important criteria going forward. So, and I think well said on your side that, yeah, that's a massive problem that needs reshaping. So now let's talk about some of the opportunities in the marketplace. Like, from your vantage point, what are some of the big opportunities that exist uh, in HR space that someone that HR should be made aware of? Like, what are some of the big opportunities that exist? Um,
Well, yeah. So I mentioned about the demise of HR. I think that the opportunity is that if you take a look at how HR works, or OD, organizational development,
hmm,
or communications, or training, or learning and development, and you take a look at all of these sort of people-focused departments, divisions, and disciplines, is that they're all looking at the same problem from a different perspective.
hmm,
So I think that where if an HR individual or an HR organization or department and organization wants to remain credible, is that they need to become more neo generalist.
hmm,
They need to understand knowledge management. They need to understand learning and development. They need to understand social networks, community management, all those kinds of things. Because really, as more and more of the repeatable stuff gets automated,
hmm,
right, there's going to be less in each one of these fields to do. And I see a future merging of all those fields. And you take a look at some of these distributed companies like Automatic, which owns
hmm,
WordPress, and these other ones, and they don't. Some of them don't even have an HR department,
hmm,
or if they do, they have one person, right, for the whole company that sort of handles that
hmm,
that type of stuff. And so, yeah, diversify would be, I think, is the big opportunity. And so that because I mean, I work in human performance technology, knowledge management, e-learning, performance support. It sort of goes on and on, HR, etc. And there's a lot of stuff that's the same, but these tribes don't talk to each other. So get out of your
hmm.
tribe and take a look at how you can support the business and understand the business the best.
Interesting. Beautiful, well said. And now we're at the tail end of the conversation, and I want to spend some time on your journey. So I think, um, if if you need to attribute some your journey and some of the qualities that has helped you stay sane and successful throughout, what would you attribute those qualities? Like, what are some of the qualities that has really helped you shape the way you are? Like, if you can share that.
Well, the blog definitely. I mean, it was. I wouldn't be anywhere without the blog. And one thing about the blog is that I'm a much better writer. I never thought of
Mm,
myself as a writer.
mm,
I started blogging. I mean, if you actually read my master's thesis from 20 years ago, it's awful. And so through the blog, I was able to connect, and I was able to become a better communicator, which I think, and then then the speaking engagements and those skills refined a lot as well. So that part of the journey definitely has was the core part of it, was just becoming a better connector, and also because I was reading more perspectives and connecting with more people is that I was getting more diversity of opinion and perspectives from people going along, and so the number of people who have influenced me, and then and again, there's things like complexity theory, which I'm not an expert in or anything like that, but I realized that was an important thing for me to understand, so I had to delve into it a little bit. I'm delving a little bit more into AI right now, even though we know it's not AI, it's machine learning or whatever, that, as my AI experts tell me. And so, and I've been able to connect with people who have deep expertise. Like I belong in one community of practice where there's about 15 or 20 people, and it's invitation only. We're all interested in work, changing the nature of work. And one of the members of that group is Valdis Krebs. And Valdis is pretty well the world expert on social network analysis. So if I want to know anything about social network analysis, I just talk to Valdis, right? Because he's the guy. And so again, connecting to people who have a really good depth of knowledge in certain areas. And if nothing else, I can say, look, Valdis, I'm interested in this aspect of social network analysis. Where do I start? He'll say, read this, check this out, go there. Okay, so that's just saved me a huge amount of time right there. And I think that's, so I mean, one of my clients worked with him for almost 2 years. And at the end, they wrote up a little blurb, on the project. They said, Harold was great, but the best thing about Harold was the network that he brought to bear. Because many times we would have a problem. I'd say, let me check the network and see what I can find and connect with you, or I know somebody, because I can't answer all the questions, right? You're only as smart or as good as your network. And so they were really impressed with that. And that's a question that HR never asks, is that who's your network? Who do you know? Because that's going to make a huge difference.
That's a very good point. I think it's a very fair point. So let's talk about some of your favorite reads, some of the books that you would recommend and suggest to our listeners and viewers. Like, what would those be?
Okay, first of all, is that because people ask this question, is that if you go on my website and you search the category books, is that you'll see I've written over 100 book reviews. So when I saw the question come, I said, okay, well, I kind of know what that is. So this summer I've actually gone to reading a little bit of some more fiction. I read about 90% nonfiction, and it was most of the fiction I read is science fiction. That really interests me. And there's one of the quotes that I put on the blog post from my fellow by the name of Elliot Pepper. I don't know, he's a writer, I think. And he says, science fiction isn't useful because it's predictive. It's useful because it reframes our perspective on the world. Like international travel or meditation, it creates space for us to question our assumptions. So I just finished a trilogy by a writer whose name is Chit-Chin Liu, which is I can send it to me or send you the link. Anyway, he wrote a trilogy called the Three Body Problem Trilogy. And so it was written in Chinese originally and it got translated several years ago. Each book is about 500 pages. And it's a really fascinating read with lots of depth in explaining physics and quantum mechanics. And basically it's about an alien civilization that discovers the Earth, and let's just say it doesn't go well. And but it was my son bought me the first book, and I read it. He said, "Dad, I think you're going to like this," and I love that one. So yeah, I find that dipping into something not related to my work at all is nice and refreshing from time to time. We talked about work a bit, and I had read a few years back. Frederick Laloux wrote a book called Reinventing Organizations, and has created a movement around the world called the Teal Organization. And then last year, I came across another book called Freedom Inc. By I have to look at the names on that. Getz, I think, Carney and Getz wrote it. They wrote it in 2009. And I think it's a much better book than Reinventing Organizations. And it takes a look at how do you build a liberated organization? And they they interview, they go into depth about 10 different companies, and they take a look at some of the similarities and things. It's not a prescriptive solution, but it really shows you how, and in different ways, because each case is different, and how you can sort of liberate the energy, the freedom, the creativity of people in the company. And so that's it. Freedom Inc. is definitely one that I would recommend.
Interesting. Awesome. So now we're at the last question, and again, Harold, thank you so much for being really generous with your time and helping us understand this landscape and really being candid about your perspective and really helpful. So now, if you want our listeners and viewers to take away something from this conversation, like what would that be? What would be your closing remark for our listeners and viewers?
Well, I mean, it's a bit trite when people say that the jobs that people are going to be doing in 5 years, half of them don't exist today or anything. That's been going on
Hmm.
forever.
Hmm.
Jobs have changed all the time through generations. The big one is about learning
Hmm.
and is about your network. Is that your long-term social safety net is going to be the people that you know or are connected to. That's how you're
Hmm.
going to find work. That's how you're going to connect with others. You're going to get new ideas and things like that. So if you don't have a diverse professional social network, you're not helping your company. You're not helping yourself. And that if you do lose your job or your employment, it's going to be much more difficult for you to do anything. And if you go at it from a perspective of learning, like what can I learn from my network and who can I learn from and how can I give back to the network? So it's that
Hmm.
connecting of curiosity. Stay curious, keep learning. And the people who do that well, I find they're not worried about their next job or the next gig.
Hmm. Awesome. With that, thank you so much, Harold, for
Thank you,
again
Vishnu.
for your time. And you're always welcome back on the podcast. And hope to get you back, learning more about things from you. You have definitely have a lot of insights for our listeners and viewers, and I do appreciate that. And whenever you're in Boston, let me know. We'll catch up over a beer or coffee, whatever. So thank you so
I
much.
love Boston. Yes, I have to get down there sometime. And next time you're
Thank,
in New Brunswick, tell me.
absolutely. It's on my list
Okay.
now. So thank you so much.
Okay.
I thought I was sick of home, but actually I was homesick. Never really knew that I would have to grow up so quick. I'm so uncomfortable, don't know anybody here. Just a couple dudes that I met once, that's it. And I go into the booth feeling nervous. Got butterflies in my stomach like I'm so worthless. Is the mic on? I don't know how to work this. Inside I'm breaking down, I hope I'm not up on the